Putin's slow annexation of Ukraine and Crimea continues with Russian nukes in Belarus. Putin had made headlines around the world a few days prior when he announced that Russia had reached an agreement with Minsk to deploy tactical nuclear weapons on Belarusian territory. Many saw this as Putin raising the stakes in his nuclear saber-rattling campaign against the West in an effort to stop them from arming Ukraine. Consolidating the Kremlin's informal control over Belarus will also be aided by the decision to station nuclear weapons there. Putin made a point of saying that the decision to send the nukes across the border was made at Lukashenko's request, but few people bought it. Belarus probably didn't have much of a say in hosting Russian nuclear weapons, but if Moscow goes through with its plans, the country will feel the effects. Brussels has already threatened Minsk with additional sanctions for what it calls a irresponsible escalation and threat to European security. If the war in Ukraine spreads to neighboring NATO member states, Belarus could also find itself as a target of retaliatory strikes. Under these conditions, military facilities in Belarus, including nuclear weapon storage facilities and airfields, could be at risk of attack. It's no secret that Lukashenko has voiced his displeasure with the decision his country made in the early 1990s to hand over the nuclear arsenal it inherited from the USSR, claiming that the international community would treat Belarus differently if it still had a nuclear arsenal. However, he had always insisted that nuclear weapons would only be stationed in Belarus in response to similar threats from the West, and this remained the case until the full-scale Russian invasion of Ukraine in February 2022. After Russia attacked Ukraine, Lukashenko's views on nuclear weapons shifted dramatically. He then held a fake referendum on changes to the Belarusian constitution, which effectively ended the country's official nuclear-free status, just days after the invasion began. Then it was reported that Russia was transferring nuclear-capable missile systems to Belarus and modifying the country's military aircraft to carry nuclear warheads. Because of Lukashenko's decision to host Russian nuclear weapons, his country is now seen as an integral part of the military threat posed by Putin's Russia. This is affecting how people in the democratic world view Minsk. Western policymakers had sought to cultivate ties with Lukashenko for much of his nearly 3 decades in power in order to counter Russian influence in Belarus. It seems like that time period has ended. As such, Lukashenko is to be treated as a Putin proxy. The failure of Lukashenko's clumsy attempts to act as peacemaker between Moscow and Kyiv has coincided with his status as a junior partner in Putin's Ukraine war. Lukashenko presented himself as a neutral figure and offered his country as a venue for peace talks when Russian aggression against Ukraine was in its early stages following the 2014 seizure of Crimea. However, Lukashenko's increasing reliance on the Kremlin to rescue his regime in August 2020 in the wake of nationwide protests in Belarus over a rigged presidential election cast doubt on his claims to neutrality. Lukashenko's support for Putin was repaid when he allowed Belarus to be used as a base to invade Ukraine. Since 2020, Russia has taken a number of measures to increase its military presence in Belarus, and the deployment of nuclear weapons would be the latest of these. There are already Russian troops stationed all over the country, and Lukashenko has no intention or ability to get them to leave. Putin's control over Belarus would be strengthened and Moscow's leverage over Belarus would increase with the establishment of a full-fledged Russian military base equipped with nuclear weapons. Under these conditions, it would be political suicide for Lukashenko to try to distance himself from Putin or assert his independence from the Kremlin.